All right, everybody. We're going to be taking a look today at the discovery of Australia. And we'll also take a look at the first colony, how it began, what some of the troubles were as people first began to colonize Australia. But that's going to be in a separate article that I'll explain about at the end of this video. For today, though, we need to take a look, for this video, we need to take a look at the discovery of Australia, who discovered it, and what were the results. Now, first of all, take a look at this map. How many of you guys noticed this wonderful bright red line of latitude? What's the name of this line? Now, hopefully you were all screaming at your screen, it's the equator! Yes. And our imaginary line of latitude, the equator, splits the Earth into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Now, this is something that I mentioned in the last video where we talked about the fact that Australia's seasons are opposite the seasons in the northern hemisphere. But what I want you to do, taking a look here and being able to see everything in front of us, notice that all of North America, Europe, and Asia are all in the northern hemisphere. Over half of Africa is in the northern hemisphere. Even the small tip of the northern part of South America is in the northern hemisphere. Now, between the 14th and 18th centuries, there was a theory by a lot of scientists, explorers, geographers. There's a theory that because there's so much land in the northern hemisphere, there has to be a gigantic southern continent to balance out all the land in the northern hemisphere. There had to be some continents that they did not know about, which means, hey, we have to do some exploring, but there had to be some continents they didn't know about that helped to balance out the Earth. Now, they're partly right and partly wrong. They were partly right in the fact that, yes, there were some continents in the south that they didn't know about, Antarctica and Australia. They're wrong in the fact that they thought these are going to be two huge land masses. I mean, after all, Australia is the smallest continent, Antarctica is the third smallest continent. Also, the planet doesn't need to have a balance of land in the north and the south. The Earth is perfectly able to orbit around the sun and spin even if there was no land in the southern hemisphere. So that's the part they were wrong about, but they were right in the fact that there were other continents that they didn't know about. Now, before anyone discovered Australia, this mysterious southern continent that must be in the southern hemisphere, they named it Terra Australis. Terra meaning land, sometimes people use terra for earth. Terra meaning land, Australis meaning southern, it's a Latin term. So Terra Australis. Well, when this wonderful continent is eventually discovered, it will be given the name Australia. So Terra Australis becomes Australia. Now, that's kind of a little background to help you out. Now we must go to the man who is credited with the discovery, the awesome Captain James Cook. Right now he's the lieutenant. Now, something we have to know about Lieutenant Cook. Let's go back here for a second so you're not too focused on the information. But, I know it sounds weird to say as a teacher, don't be too focused on the information. We're going to get back to the information. But what I need you to know is this. James Cook is the last of the great explorers. So think about when we did Latin America. Remember we talked about the age of exploration, Prince Henry the Navigator funding sailors to explore along the Portuguese coast and then down into Africa. Remember how we talked about Christopher Columbus in 1492 discovering the New World, people realizing, oh, there are two gigantic continents, North America and South America. And we talked about how that began the age of exploration. Well, guess what? That age eventually has to come to an end because there are only so many continents on the planet. Well, it's going to come to an end with the discovery of Australia. And it is James Cook. James Cook makes a lot of major discoveries. So he is the last of the great explorers. So you kind of start with Christopher Columbus and you end with James Cook. My hand's totally off screen. There we go. See how that works? By the way, this is called magic, guys, right here, the magic of editing. No, so James, from Christopher Columbus to James Cook. That is going to be the start and the end of the age of exploration. So James Cook is a fascinating guy to take a look at. And that's what we're going to do right now. So Mr. Cook, now he's born in 1729. I think November 7th, 1729. I'll correct that if I look and realize that's wrong. But November 7th, 1729. we're going to skip ahead to what he is doing in Tahiti. So in May 1768, Lieutenant James Cook, he was given the assignment to command a ship taking scientists from the Royal Observatory, taking them to Tahiti. Now, think about it, scientists, they're not exactly the greatest sailors on Earth. So his job is to get them from England all the way to Tahiti, which is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Get them to Tahiti and then back home in one piece while they're doing all their science experiments. I believe, if I remember correctly, the Royal Observatory, think about that word observatory, I want to say that they were taking a look at a solar eclipse, but the point was getting them out to Tahiti, if I can say that correctly, and then getting them back home. That was his mission. Now, in the middle of being in Tahiti, by the way, here's Tahiti. There's Tahiti. See the circle right here because Tahiti is a set of islands. Again, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now, while in Tahiti, Cook is going to receive another assignment. Basically, hey, since you're out there already, we want you to take a look. See if you can find the southern continent. Start to explore the area of the Pacific Ocean. Look at the coordinates that we really haven't had. We haven't been able to get a bunch of ships to take a look at. See if you can discover Terra Australis. Right, so on August 9th, 1769, Cook is going to leave Tahiti. He's going to set sail on the very famous ship, the HMS Endeavor. Right, saying the HMS Endeavor, when we talk about James Cook, that's like saying the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, the three ships that Columbus used, or talking about how the Pilgrims arrived in 1620 on the Mayflower. The HMS Endeavor that name has that kind of place in terms of legend, not legend because it's true, but I should say it's got that name. That name has its place in history. So on the HMS Endeavor, by the way, HMS can stand for His Majesty's ship or Her Majesty's ship, depending on if it's a king or queen who's ruling England at the time. So the HMS Endeavor. Now, by the way, again, this is just kind of giving us some background. I'll have this PowerPoint in the module, but this is just giving us background that we've already covered, talking about Terra Australis. Again, what's his job? His job is to look for Terra Australis. Now, I did want to show you this. This is a map. Again, I believe this map was made in the 15th century. But again, remember, people believed there had to be a giant, huge, ginormous southern continent. So look here. This is kind of a map rendering an idea of what this continent must look like. So notice how huge this southern continent is, Terra Australis. This was someone's idea of what the size of this continent. Now, we can all look and laugh, but you gotta remember, this is a time when there were no GPSs, there were no global positioning system, which means you need satellites. Nobody had satellites. There was no way to know. You actually had to get out and do the exploration. So we can't laugh at them too much. We can laugh at the map, but it's not like these people were stupid or anything. They had a theory that they had to go on, and luckily, it at least led to the discovery of Australia. And Mr. McGee's having a hard time speaking today. All right, I wonder how many times I've said that if I look back through all my videos. So, on October 6th, 1769, James Cook lands on what we now call New Zealand. So it's not just Australia that he discovers, but he discovers New Zealand. Right? Cook mapped much of New Zealand's coast during this time. This is something we haven't talked too much about. Now, you notice I have actually mentioned it with Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain. Discovering a place is fantastic. I even mentioned this a little bit with Columbus. But you have to map the area. Because remember, nobody's seen these places before. So you have to have a good, detailed map that you can then take back to your home country. Then other explorers can get copies of that map. And then they can do their exploration and add more and more to the map. So it's very important that if you discover an area, you map it out so that you can go back and that other people can go back as well. So he is going to map much of New Zealand's coast during this time. It helps people to see, okay, so here's New Zealand, here's a point. If I can get to this point, now from here, let me go and continue to search other areas. So New Zealand, by the way, this is the very imaginative North Island and South Island when we're taking a look at New Zealand. So two main islands, North and South. Remember, it's still 2,500 miles from Australia. Now, to Australia. So after mapping New Zealand, Cook sailed west. In April 1770, he saw the northeast coast of Australia. So Cook lands in the area that we now know as Sydney. Okay, now obviously he didn't land at Sydney. There was no city of Sydney. But the area where he lands is going to be near the eventual first city, even though it's called Botany Bay, it's eventually going to be called Sydney. So in 1770, he lands on the northeast coast of Australia. Again, why is this important? Look, Cook mapped part of the east coast of Australia before going back to England in 1775. Now, Cook is not the first person to have seen part of Australia. There was a Dutch explorer who got to the northern tip of Australia, but it's Cook with those detailed maps mapping the east coast of Australia and then heading back to England that people begin to realize, hey, you know what? This guy might have something here. Kind of remember we talked about Christopher Columbus? It took other people realizing, hey, you know what? I think this guy might have something. Well, again, having those maps, those detailed maps, helps people understand this is maybe more than just simply a little small island out in the Pacific. So he's going to make 3 journeys. He's going to make 3 trips, by the way. And so, again, I will have this in the module, but you'll be able to see the route that he took with each trip. But being able to map Australia, being able to map New Zealand, that is going to help people understand more about the Pacific than ever before. Oh, by the way, I want to take a look at one other thing. Notice he goes back to England in 1775. So finding Australia is going to be amazing because Britain can build a colony in Australia. But the fact that he goes back with this discovery in 1775, someone tell me, what major event is going to happen in 1776, 1 year after Cook gets back? Well, hopefully you guys are screaming just as loudly when we're talking about the equator. Hopefully you're screaming, the American Revolution. Yes, the Declaration of Independence is going to be written and signed in 1776. And that Declaration of Independence, independence from whom? Oh, independence from England. The American colonies are breaking away from England and the American Revolution is going to begin. Now, fast forward, we know that the Americans won the revolution against Britain. Yes, all right. But guess what happens? That means Britain just lost one of their best colonies. But now, with Cook's discovery, they have a new place to start a colony, which is going to be Australia. So this is going to come in very handy, even though Cook doesn't know it at the time, even though England doesn't know it at the time. But when England loses their best colony in America, they're now going to have a new piece of land that they can colonize, a new piece of land to be able to get resources from. So it's amazing how history kind of works. And it's amazing how little discoveries that you might not know the impact of, we get to see it now as people who get to look back and see these events. We can see the connections and see how important that discovery is for England after England loses their American colonies. All right, so by the way, a little gigantic version of mapping all of James Cook's routes. We're going to keep on going. Again, try to keep this video under 20 minutes if possible. So, Cook's return, newly promoted Captain James Cook. I guess that's what happens when you discover a continent, you do get a promotion. All right, he would make several more voyages, map more of New Zealand. He sailed further south toward Antarctica than any sailor before him. Kind of hard to get to Antarctica. Again, wooden ships. But the last thing you want to do is get stuck in that ice. And also, if there's a hole in that boat, there are no trees for you to be able to get more timber from. It's also pretty cold in Antarctica. I'm just saying that. So he also discovered the islands of Hawaii as well. So think about it. Hawaii is now a state in the United States. He discovered the islands of Hawaii. Unfortunately for him, he also is going to die in Hawaii. So there's going to be, there's various accounts, but basically some of the natives stole one of the boats, not the ship, but you notice a ship normally has little small boats that sailors will get out on and then row to the coast. Some of the natives stole that. There was disagreement between himself and the natives. He ends up getting killed. So he's going to die in Hawaii on February 14th, 1779. Now, kind of sad. One of my students was saying, hey, at least you get to die in Hawaii. Well, you know what? You're still dead. So you don't really get to enjoy Hawaii that much. So sad. His death is sad, but we honor his discoveries, and we honor the fact that he is the last great explorer. And the work that he did in the Pacific helped us to understand more about the Pacific Ocean, more about the islands and the lands in the Pacific Ocean than ever before. And yes, I do know that island and land are the same thing, but I should say islands and continents in the Pacific, and it helped us to understand more about that region than we did before that point. So, a tip of the hat to Mr. James Cook. Now, a couple of things for you guys. If you're thinking, wait, where's the assignment? Okay, the assignment is this. I have posted an article in the module. So if you notice, it will probably say, number 1, watch the first YouTube video. Then it'll say number 2. Well, if you look at number 2 has an article posted. It's going to be an article giving you kind of the details of the first colonists to come to Australia. What I want you to do, I want you to read through that article. It's 3 pages. So read through the article, and I want you to answer this question. Based on what you read, would you want to have come to Australia? Would it have been worth it to you to go to Australia and try to start that colony and figure out, what you could do, maybe strike it rich in wool or whatnot? Or would you have stayed in England? Now, when you read it, there were obviously convicts who were taken to Australia. Convicts are people who were in prison. So there were criminals who were taken to Australia as well. I'm not saying, do you want to be a criminal? Let's say that you're one of the free people who went to Australia. Would you have made that choice? Now, if you say yes, you need to provide evidence based from the article about why you would make that choice. So I need to see that you've actually read the article, that you can provide me evidence to back up why you said yes. If you said no, I need to have evidence from the article to show me why you chose no. You would have stayed in England instead. All right, so read the article. Tell me, would you have made that trip to Australia? Yes or no? Either way, provide evidence in the article to back up why you made that choice. Okay? All right. By the way, also keep in mind, Friday is the deadline. I've already emailed you guys talking about making sure that you get work done, tests done that you haven't taken, assignments that you haven't finished yet to turn those in. I'm going to need all those by Friday. So make sure that you turn in that work. Make sure you're getting your work in on time. There will be a conference today. Let me know if you have any questions, okay? I'll see you in conference. Take care, guys.